All right, we are now recording. So, Susan Lee.
Okay, great, Brittany. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you all for being in this webinar this afternoon. As Brittany mentioned, my name is Susan, and I am a research scientist at CATIA. And CATIA is an interdisciplinary rehabilitation research center, and then we think about a lot of different ways that design and technologies can be leveraged to enhance the lives of people with disabilities and limited function. We do that in a wide variety of settings and different contexts. But in today's webinar, I'll focus on talking about the work we've done and are currently doing to see how we might use design and technology to address the toileting and transfer needs for people aging with disabilities. And as Brittany mentioned, I should actually start with an apology and a disclaimer that this was meant to be co-presented with John Sanford, who is the director of CATIA, but I am going to try my best to sort of fill in his shoes and then sort of take this presentation by myself. So if there are any questions and requests for clarification throughout the presentation, I'll try to sort of pay attention to the little panel I see on the back. If I think this is a way I get notified if there are any questions throughout the presentation. So the way I've shaped this webinar is I'll kind of start talking about why toileting and transfers matter in this population and why CATIA really cares about it, although I suspect that this might be pretty intuitive for some of us in the webinar. Then I'll quickly review some of the practices and strategies currently being used at the environmental level, what we're currently doing to address the needs that arise during toileting and transferring. And then I'll spend the big bulk of the presentation talking about the work that we've done at CATIA recently and then still ongoing, about how we sort of address some of the shortcomings, about the ways that we're going about it now, and how we see ourselves going. So toileting and transferring matter for lots of different reasons, and they, as I mentioned, they may be intuitive for some of us in this webinar, but toileting and transferring are some of the most physically demanding activities of daily living and requiring a constellation of functional abilities to come together. So if we're thinking about just the range of different things, we're talking about just adequate muscle strength, range of motion, static and dynamic balance, and all of these individual underlying abilities need to come together for somebody to be independent and safe in toileting and transferring. And as these underlying abilities sort of decrease with age, there is an increased prevalence of people experiencing difficulty while engaging in this task. So when we're talking about the general population, just of the general population of community older adults 65 and older, it's estimated that about 6% of the people experience some degree of difficulty with this task, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but if we start to hone in on the population that we are sort of most likely to interface with in the healthcare and rehabilitation continuum, we see a great increase in the prevalence of difficulty, with an estimate of about 45% of community dwelling older adults that are classified as being frail or in need of more healthcare needs. About one in two people that we would interface with in the healthcare and rehabilitation system would report having some difficulty associated with the task. And the number sort of increases even more when we're talking about specific facilities and institutions, like skilled nursing and assisted living facilities, where the vast majority of the residents have some degree of difficulty with this task. And when we're talking about difficulty, we're not only talking about when this tasks are very hard for people to do, but at some point it becomes a task that's they're not able to complete independently. So in need of physical assistance of another human or even two caregivers. And loss of independence in toileting and bathing is highly predictive of move to a higher level of care and institutionalization. And also, as you can imagine, if you lose the ability to be independent in your basic activities of daily living, sort of your ability to engage in anything else that you need to do in your daily life also tends to decrease. Hence the sort of increased caregiver burden for people who need to take on the role of helping the individual complete this task. So when we think about how we may be addressing the needs that arise when transfers become difficult, there are broadly two things that we tend to think about. So the first is we think about interventions at the level of space. So how the space is designed to be barrier-free and accessible and usable for people with disabilities. And for the most part, in the public facilities, a lot of these are guided by the ADA accessibility requirements, which I'll get to in a little bit. And then second, there are stuff at the level of products. So the things that exist within the space, such as assistive technology, durable medical equipment, and then so sort of the range of a range of solutions that could potentially be used to meet those needs are sort of listed here, just to get an idea of the wide variety of things, the possible solutions that exist. And some of them can be self-bought by the individual experiencing difficulty themselves, and but sometimes they are prescribed and sort of procured as a result of a formal assessment by an occupational therapist who has an understanding about what the underlying causes of difficulty is, and then to the best ability of an occupational therapist to figure out what the best solutions may be for that. So a lot of these things have been shown to be beneficial, and then and resulting in a lot of positive outcomes, including a lot of these things that we would want to shoot for in terms of increasing independence in the activities, increasing effectiveness of caregivers and reducing caregiver burden, and employing these environmental intervention approaches are also helpful in decreasing the likelihood of an institutionalization and also reducing risk of falls. However, the overarching problem that we are tackling with at CATIA is that despite a lot of these best practices, transfers and toileting remain really, really difficult for a lot of people, and they are still some of the most physically demanding activities of daily living. So even with the best assistive technology, even with the best durable medical equipment that have been procured and sort of recommended by an expert healthcare professional, they still experience a great degree of difficulty doing the task, and also continue to experience falls and injuries as a result of it. And caregivers that provide the assistance to the people, they also these assistants contribute to a high level of injury and overexertion and physical burden for them as well. So in light of these remaining challenges associated with toileting and transfers, we challenge ourselves to think about how things could be made better. So, so in the remainder of this webinar, I'll talk about sort of the three projects that we've been involved in with the goal of addressing some of these elements that are listed here. So we're thinking about creating environments and spaces and products that help people become more safe and independent in these activities, better than what is currently out there. Environments that can support caregivers who assist in the toileting and transferring, and that prevent them from experiencing caregiver burden and injuries. And the third point is a little bit different, but nonetheless very important. In the College of Design, we also challenge ourselves to think about how a lot of these solutions can be made so that they can be fully embraced by the user. So there are a lot of sort of underlying opinions and thoughts that a lot of the solutions out there are looking very institutional or ugly, and there's a major barrier for the solutions to be fully embraced by the users. So I'll talk about in the next few slides the three projects that we've been involved in with the goal of addressing some of these issues. So the first project I like to talk about is a project where we took the approach of intervening at the level of space. So with funding from the Rothschild Foundation, which is a private philanthropic organization which concerns itself with improving the lives of people living in assisted living facilities and skilled nursing facilities. And our task here and our goal here was to think about how we improve the design of the bathrooms that they are currently using in these facilities. So, in the United States, all public facilities are mandated to adhere to the ADA standards for accessible design. Sorry, I just yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry. So all public facilities are mandated to adhere to the ADA accessible design, which is essentially a set of technical and scoping requirements that sort of lay out what features that the physical environment needs to have. And this is in large part how the federal government defines whether a place is accessible for people with mobility limitations. So the standards mandate that we have two sets of grab bars, one on the rear and one on the sidewall. And the one on the sidewall needs to be placed somewhere between 16 to 18 inches from the center line of the toilet, and also 33 to 36 inches from the finished floor to the tip of the grab bar. And there's some stipulations about how much clearance there needs to have around the fixtures. And then that's to allow sort of a 360-degree turn on a mobility device. And so these technical requirements for grab bars and toilets in public facilities have been specified ever since the earliest efforts to codify these accessibility. And then the first effort to do that was in the initial 1961 American National Standards Institute. But for the most part, these requirements have not changed since their establishment, and that remains true for the up to the most recent update to the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act accessibility standards. So when we think about people in the assisted living and skilled nursing facilities, this is the environment that they're given, and this is where the transfers are currently occurring in. But so recognizing that these standards were developed over 50 years ago at this point, there are questions about how applicable these accessibility requirements are for the people, for the older adults aging with disabilities in these facilities. These accessibility requirements, when they were first specified, they were based on and informed by and was designed to accommodate the capabilities of war veterans returning from combat from the Korean and Vietnam Wars that have sustained injuries like spinal cord injuries that leave people paralyzed from the lower paralyzed. And also sustain lower body amputation, and typically resulting in the users becoming a full-time wheelchair user. They were able to, however, capitalize on the fact that these users they were designing for were otherwise in very good physical condition with good upper body strength to use the grab bars and other supports to perform sort of the sliding transfers on and off the wheelchair. But the wheelchair users today sort of paint a very different picture. We are not dealing exclusively with young adults with good upper body strength anymore, thanks to sort of the dramatic increase in the aging population. And aging is the single most significant factor impacting wheelchair use. Let's see. So older adults, although they are a lot of older adults are using wheelchair users. They are typically not full-time wheelchair users, although some of them are, but the majority of them are partially ambulatory and perform sit-to-stand transfers rather than the sort of the sliding transfers that the standards were sort of developed for. In addition to needing something to pull themselves out of the wheelchair, older adults typically need something to balance on, to steady themselves because they tend to sort of lack the leg strength that make it difficult to raise and lower on and off a toilet, and also compounded with the gait imbalance they may experience that might limit their ability to stand for a long period of time without losing balance. So this was a survey completed by John and colleagues about 20 years ago now. But this was sort of the first literature documenting the ineffectiveness of the ADA standards in meeting the needs of older people. So what the survey essentially did was that the community dwelling older adults were asked to evaluate 4 different configurations of grab bars. So one being the ADA configurations that I just just mentioned, but also there were three alternative grab bar configurations. And when the users were given the chance to try different options beyond what is currently offered by the ADA, the results were pretty clear that older adults preferred configurations. The alternative configurations that wasn't the ADA. So typically, the bilateral the provision of two grab bars on the side with some flexibility in the movement was evaluated to be more facilitating of their performance. And the sort of results were consistent across different types of transfers and transfer techniques they would be using. So sort of realizing that there might be a need for a special consideration in the environments that are typically being used primarily by older people, the Rothschild Foundation had convened a task force committee to look into this issue a little bit further. So sort of considering the fact that there will be some promise in developing a supplemental guideline to the current ADA accessibility standards that nursing homes and assisted living facilities can implement to be more responsive for the people that are in these facilities. So while up until this point, we had a lot of thoughts about, we had a lot of prevailing thoughts that ADA isn't very effective, but we hadn't had a lot of data or evidence to support which specific spatial and configurational dimensions would be specified in the supplemental guidelines, and this is what this project was about. And we did this in sort of a three-part methodology, and we started off by trying to understand the breadth and the range of dimensions that the residents and caregivers in assisted living facilities and skilled nursing facilities would need and prefer. And then this was followed by a biomechanical study where we try to understand if there are any differential impact on the biomechanical demands involved in the transfers. And after steps 1 and 2 were completed, the ranges of the dimensions and configurations were statistically analyzed to identify sort of this one configuration that we felt like would work better for all the users. And these were followed by a validation study at the end. So in this study, similar to the survey that you had said we had just talked about before, the users, including the residents themselves and the caregivers, were asked to sort of perform simulated transfers on and off a toilet using these three configurations. So using the ADA configurations as a baseline again, but also allowing them to try out the bilateral grab bar configuration, and also the third configuration, giving them the chance to sort of rearrange the toilet and the grab bars in any way they wanted. So in this toilet rig that we had built for this purpose, that allow sort of flexibility in where the grab bars go, and then where the toilets sort of get placed, and we were able to sort of ask the users to identify the exact dimensions that would work best for them. And these are sort of evaluated in some key measures important to understanding the usability of the space. Okay. So the results of this study was a pretty clear indicator that again, when users were given the chance to be more flexible and to have a flexible environment that fit their needs, they had a tendency and then the trend to evaluate those grab bars more positively than what was specified in the ADA. And these are also statistically significant in across all the measures, almost all the measures that we had looked at. So based on these user evaluations, we identified using statistics and statistical analysis a set of configurations that we would feel would be specified in these alternative standards. And so we say that for all levels of dependence, so So regardless of whether the transfer is independent, one-person assist or two-person assist, this configuration that consists of two bilateral fold-down grab bars that are placed 14 inches from the center line of the toilet, so a little bit closer in than what is specified by the ADA, and also somewhere between 30 to 33 inches above the finished floor, so a little bit lower than what is specified by the ADA. So we felt that these recommendations and then going back to the validation study, we had learned that these would be and then when these were validated, by bringing the rig back into the facilities, we had found that the configuration were positively received by the individuals. And overall, as you can see with the charts, the ratings were positive, but as highlighted highlighted in red, we can see that this configuration was less successful in supporting sort of the two-person assist transfers. So even with our best effort in trying to create an environment that works better than what is currently specified, we learned that there are some room for improvement and sort of lessons learned regarding that. So as a result of this study, we have sort of have learned and sort of confirmed our belief that even with having trying to codify an accessibility standard that we feel would work better than what is specified currently by the ADA, it is very, very difficult in a fixed environment to something that works for everyone. And that is perhaps a limitation inherent to a physical environment that has to be fixed and static, which leads to our next project, which we had explored the possibility of using advanced technologies to sort of overcome the issues that we had talked about just now. So the limitations of a fixed environment is that they may work for some people some of the time, but they don't necessarily work for all of the people all of the time. And this is particularly an important consideration in the population that are aging with disabilities, where their abilities are changing over time, or even day to day, or within the day. There is considerable differences in their abilities, and by the virtue of environment being fixed, they are not always successful in meeting the needs of the users. So this project is about exploring the possibility of overcoming these limitation by integrating digital technologies into the physical environment. So we start thinking about how we might be able to develop a bathroom environment that can adapt to user needs. And then these we feel is possible by sort of leveraging the digital technologies, where the cost of embedded sensors can continue to decrease, and sort of the things we can do with the increased computing powers of collecting data and analyzing them real time is really giving us a fruitful opportunity to be able to sort of envision these environments. So right now we are in the process of developing this first iteration of these dynamic environments. So so in order for us to develop a bathroom that is dynamic and sort of changes with the users, we have some capabilities that we need to build in. So we are envisioning a bathroom that consists of a floor that with load cells on them that are capable of measuring force and location of the users with pretty good accuracy. With that, we also have what we call a smart toilet, which is essentially a motorized toilet system that provides not only vertical but horizontal movement to allow flexibility in how it's configured. And also on the toilet, we have some load cells on the toilet seats to be able to measure weight of the users as well as weight shifts during a transfer on the seat. As far as the grab bars go, again, the vertical and horizontal movement that allows flexibility in how they are placed. And we have embedded sensors on the grab bars that are able to tell us the number of hands being placed on the grab bars and to an extent what type of grip and force are being applied. So in addition to the sensing capabilities, we are also tracking user movement using the Connect. So as we're starting to use the sensing capabilities and the user movement that is tracked by the Connect, we're starting to analyze the trials that we're conducting, and we're beginning to understand how sort of user performance and quality of that performance can be sensed and analyzed using embedded sensors. So we have conducting a few initial the protocols in order to understand the capabilities of the system and how it needs to be sort of iterated further based on the user feedback. So essentially what happens in a study like this when we're trying to understand and validate the system is we ask the users to transfer on and off a toilet in this environment, and sort of we do this and trying to understand and adjust the toilet and grab bar fixtures to sort of best meet the needs and abilities of them. So this is sort of what our typical study protocol would look like. So we start from the hallway where they are coming in, ambulating through the hallway into the bathroom. And this is a study where the participant chooses not to use a bar. And by continuing to conduct these studies sort of over time, we have the participants to come back to us, every so often, recognizing the fact that their abilities would not be the same throughout all of these visits. And we try to understand a little bit more about how user performance and user interaction with the fixtures may be able to get us closer to sort of envisioning this environment that responds to a user's need and sort of spontaneously adjust over time. So some of the next steps of this project include building sort of the similar sensing capability system for the bathtub and sort of the grab bars that would be embedded in the bathtub system. So we're envisioning sort of a bathtub that can have some vertical adjustment to the ceiling, so that this could be a dual bathtub and a curbless shower dual product to allow flexibility in how people choose to engage in their bathing tasks, and to allow flexibility in the grab bars and how they may be placed according to however the user needs them. We are exploring some possibilities of using perforated walls with magnets that allow grab bars sort of to be placed in any orientation and location according to the needs. So this is a part of a long-term study, obviously, and but we do envision that there may be some commercializable products that come along the way, but essentially what happens and sort of the big picture behind this all is that we are looking into and sort of thinking about this new class of universally designed products that may meet the individual's changing needs by integrating digital technologies into the physical world to overcome some of the challenge we have with the physical environment currently. So the last project I would like to talk about is based on the premise that even though we have been doing a lot of studies and developing a lot of products, we still don't know a whole lot about what needs to be done. So this project that I like to talk about last is all about conducting more user needs research to uncover the unmet needs that exist in toilet transfers and trying to figure out and what needs to be done in the future. And we focus this study on looking at the dyadic considerations of assisted transfers. We typically find that there is a significant caregiver burden associated with physically assisting and providing the hands-on assistance, and there's a lot of design opportunities and development opportunities to develop technologies and products that would better meet their needs. So so this is just a select footage of the home visits that we conduct in order to understand how current products and technologies are being used in the homes with a caregiving dyad, where the caregiver oftentimes is an informal caregiver or a non-paid family caregiver that provides these hands-on tasks. So these visits sort of include we have after we observe things that are happening in real time and in action, we sort of follow this up by having a conversation about sort of the difficulties that they have with these activities and how, and in the user's perspective, how they feel the design and solutions and there could be better solutions to meet those needs. This is a diagram sort of illustrating how the approach we see ourselves taking in the space is that caregivers, although they are a pivotal source of support for the care recipient who has difficulty with the toileting and transfers, they are in effect, the individuals in need of environmental supports themselves. So instead of thinking about this sort of in a dichotomous thing where the caregiver is always just providing support to the care recipient, we think about this sort of interrelated connection in which the assistive technology can directly support and offset some of the demands that caregiver needs to expand. So in summary, these projects sort of exemplify the need to consider design and technologies in relation to the changing demographics. We need to create new ways to provide interventions for people that are aging with disabilities that not only account for the diversity of abilities, but also making sure that the solutions are usable and accepted by the end users themselves. We see that design and technology sort of offer some promise to develop solutions that are more flexible and with increased abilities to meet people's needs in a more personalized way. And in order to do so, throughout our projects, we try to incorporate the users at every point in the process, and there will be while we're trying to do this to the best of our ability, there is probably some need for a more robust framework to guide this process as we go forward. So yeah, that brings me to the last of my slides. So thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions that I can address, this will be a good time.
So I think everyone is unmuted. If you have any questions, feel free to shout them out. Um, so I guess I have a question. So Susan, you said you're doing the caregiver dyad study, and then you're also doing the study within the house.
Hmm.
Um, so how are you having trouble recruiting? How are you recruiting for these studies?
That is always the biggest issue with research. I think we're dealing with a population that is, very, very vulnerable, and perhaps
Hmm.
not, there's not a whole lot of interface historically in research with the population.
Hmm.
Um, Yeah, especially the challenge we run into with bringing people into the home. There's some really, great logistical challenges and transportation issues that sometimes
Hmm.
prevent people, even the people that are interested in, the getting them into the facilities has been, an issue that we kind of always are up against.
Right.
Um,
I have a second question. Um, For the study in the house, you said that they're doing the tug to demonstrate getting to and from the toilet if they're ambulatory, and then they do the transfer on and off. Will you be doing anything where you have them sit for longer on the toilet to kind of factor in the time, maybe if someone's perhaps having a bowel movement and they're sitting for 10 minutes and then getting up, and like if that changes anything in their abilities to transfer, like limbs fall asleep or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the as we iterate on sort of the protocols and as we have sort of a more robust system, right now, as I said, we're sort of continually improving the systems as we go along. So right
Hmm.
now we have a protocol that is pretty simplistic. So we just ask them as they're as they come into the toilet and then take and transfer onto the toilet. Um, we only sort of go in as far as just making sure that they get off after a certain point. But we don't necessarily have specified that to be the thing that we're looking at as of now.
Okay.
But but yeah, as I think just the length of time on the seats, if we were sort of trying to replicate sort of the realistic actions and sequences, that would be a really important point to consider as we go on.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. I think the presentation was great. Her contact information is here on the last slide. If anybody has any questions for her or for Dr. Sanford, his email address is also there. As I said, we're recording the presentation, so it will be available online. Probably in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to try to make sure that it's closed captioned. So sometimes that takes a little time to make sure that the transcript recorded properly, and to edit it for any things that are having difficulties. And then we'll just kind of edit for time before we put it up. So if no one else has any questions, I guess we'll wrap up. Um, Thanks again, Susan. Thank you all for attending.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, okay. She's gone.